He tried to warn us, but nobody listened. James Garner, the Hollywood legend known for his quiet strength and integrity, once spoke words that carried more weight than anyone realized. "You'd comfort me, hold me, make me think I could take anything," he once said, but that wasn't just about love. It was a warning, hidden in plain sight. Garner was never the type to stir up scandal. He built his legacy on calm professionalism and earned respect in an industry full of egos. But behind that calm exterior was a man who had seen too much, someone who tried to protect others from a force more toxic than anyone dared admit. And now, decades later, the truth behind what he saw is finally starting to emerge. He wasn't the type to gossip, exaggerate, or throw shade for the sake of drama. James Garner built his career on quiet strength, reliability, and respect, not just from directors and fans, but from the very crews that made Hollywood run. He showed up, did the work, and treated everyone, from the camera operator to the studio head, with the same grounded humility. So when a man like Garner raised a red flag about someone, it meant something. But Hollywood didn't listen. Not then. He spoke cautiously, behind closed doors, about one actress, an icon of elegance, grace, and timeless appeal. To the public, she was everything a star should be, bold, magnetic, untouchable. But James had seen past the performance. He sensed something calculated, something cold, a side of her that didn't match the glamorous image the world adored. He tried to warn others. And for years, he was ignored. After all, how could someone so polished, so beloved, be anything but perfect? Only now are the cracks in that perfect image beginning to show, and Garner's quiet warning is starting to make a lot more sense. But when the truth finally started leaking out, it changed everything. Over time, whispers became confessions, not just from fellow actors, but from directors, assistants, even background crew members who had once stayed silent. And suddenly, James Garner's quiet warning didn't sound bitter or exaggerated. It sounded prophetic. The question haunted everyone: what did Garner see that others missed? And why did it take so long for the industry to believe him? To answer that, you have to understand who she was, not just to Hollywood, but to the world. Lauren Bacall wasn't simply a star, she was cinematic royalty. From the moment she first appeared on screen in the 1940s, with that famously smoky voice and those piercing arched brows, she shattered the mold of the demure, soft-spoken ingenue. Her debut in To Have and Have Not opposite Humphrey Bogart sparked one of the most legendary screen romances of all time, both on screen and off. Bacall didn't just capture attention, she commanded it. She became the embodiment of sophistication, mystery, and strength. Critics praised her brilliance, studios bowed to her presence, and fans saw her as untouchable. But behind the wit and poise was a woman who played by her own rules, fiercely intelligent, incredibly strategic, and, as Garner seemed to sense, perhaps not as warm-hearted as the world wanted to believe. She gained a reputation as a tough, no-nonsense woman who knew precisely what she wanted and typically got it. She went through the industry with a sort of magnetic force. She was described in interviews as refreshingly honest and ferociously brilliant. She refused to be categorized as a damsel or a sidekick, spoke her opinion, and defied convention. She was considered a feminist icon by many before the term had even gained use. However, beneath all of that refinement and grace, there were murmurs. The kind that never appeared in television interviews or magazine spreads. She was occasionally characterized by her coworkers as aloof, domineering, and even patronizing. You wouldn't see it in her performances or hear it from her fans. However, her name carried a caution in private circles. Quiet, subtle, and genuine. But because Lauren Beale was Lauren Beale, such rumors were mostly ignored when they did come up. Being brave and unrepentant had been the cornerstones of her persona. Her self-assurance was motivating to some. Others, such as one highly regarded actor, however, saw it as something completely else. James Garner also noticed the difference. He sensed it. And he was unable to keep it to himself once they started working together. However, that was just the start. Both Lauren Beale and James Garner were already well-known figures by the time they ended up collaborating on the same project. Garner had established his reputation with the Rockford Files and gained notoriety in Maverick for his easy charm. The person who everyone liked was him. Calm, laid back, and able to disarm even the most stubborn people with a dry sense of humor. From directors to extras, he was renowned for treating everyone with dignity on set. Garner was anchored in an egocentric town. Then came the 1981 psychological thriller The Fan, in which Garner played Beale's ex-husband and she played a Broadway star who is being hounded by an obsessive fan. Two seasoned pros should have worked together seamlessly. But Garner knew something was wrong very immediately once production started. The friction between the two was not explosive, according to those with knowledge of the production. On the outside, it was professional, chilly, and subtle, but below there was an unavoidable quiet friction. Garner was accustomed to family-like sets. Call, however, brought something new. She was exacting, demanding, and occasionally contemptuous of anybody who didn't live up to her expectations or questioned her authority. Although she didn't shout, her enthusiasm could make the entire room tense. For his part, Garner never engaged in power disputes or attempted to overshadow her. He wasn't like that. When things wasn't working, though, he didn't pretend either. It appeared that Bacall was not really interested in changing her strategy to promote harmony. She ensured that everyone else was aware of her standing. Some crew members started talking behind closed doors. During blocking, there were whispers that Beale was rewriting lines on set or challenging the director's authority. Despite his reluctance to raise a commotion, Garner was becoming more and more irritated, not because he required preferential treatment, but rather because the work itself was suffering. Later, without explicitly mentioning names, he would allude to how awful the encounter had been. However, others who knew him and the set knew exactly who he was talking about. Beale's demeanor affected not only him but also a number of other people who worked on the movie. What caused the discomfort to worsen? Beale failed to recognize the issue. From her point of view, she was just being straightforward, competent, and effective. Garner, however, saw it as something quite different. Throughout his career, he had collaborated with a wide range of individuals. Bold, timid, quirky, and self-assured. But he didn't see confidence in Beale. Control was the issue. And not the sort that makes people admire you, the kind that alienates others. Garner would not remain silent indefinitely, but for the moment he kept most of it to himself. People were never known to be thrown under the bus by James Garner. He was reticent, courteous, and nearly intolerant of rumors. Therefore, it meant something when he did mention someone, even in passing. Years after they collaborated on The Fan, he eventually expressed his opinions about Lauren Beale, and they were scathing. He never attacked Beale in detail in his memoir, The Garner Files. He didn't do that. However, he made it apparent that their time together had been challenging. He characterized her as shrewd, defensive, and prone to despise everyone around her. He didn't mention names or make allegations, but it was clear that her actions had made an impression, and a bad one. Working with her was like walking on eggshells, he recalled. She was impatient with compromise and expected things to go her way. Her approach was exhausting to Garner, who valued kindness and teamwork. It was more than her manner that troubled him. The ease with which others excused it. People ignored what was happening in front of them because of her reputation, beauty, and prestige. And that was nothing out of the ordinary in Hollywood. Powerful people have a long history of being pardoned for actions that no one else would tolerate, particularly if they had a stellar resume and a huge number of devoted followers that dated back decades. There were no headlines or negative reactions to Garner's comments. The majority of people actually ignored them. After all, Beale was a legend. She had married Humphrey Bogart, worked with the greatest, and made a career out of being fearless and unrepentant. It was frequently interpreted as a sign of weakness or jealousy if someone complained about her. Garner, however, had nothing to demonstrate. He didn't harbor resentment. He had no plans. He was only being straightforward and honest, like he always had been. Perhaps that's why it was so simple to overlook. He wasn't yelling from rooftops or giving the media press leaks. All he was doing was subtly cautioning the next person in line, hoping that their experience would be less complicated than his. Regretfully, the majority of people ignored that warning. And they most likely ought to have, since it became evident that Garner had not been alone as the reports began to accumulate. The majority of people recall The Fan as a low-key thriller that was spooky, fashionable, and supported by Lauren Beale's powerful presence. However, the tension that was boiling just out of frame was never visible to the public. Behind them, something much less glamorous was happening while the cameras rolled. Co-stars hardly ever shook James Garner, an experienced actor who had collaborated with everyone from Steve McQueen to Julie Andrews. However, he had to walk a tightrope on the set of The Fan. Despite never being explicitly angry, the call produced a tense environment throughout the entire set. They recorded conversations. Instructions became orders, and people who tried to make recommendations or ideas, especially if they questioned her authority, were sometimes met with cold or contemptuous reactions. Later, crew members spoke of a difficult-to-ignore dynamic. Bicol desired authority over the production's energy as well as her scenes. She resisted rewrites, questioned direction, and was known to overturn judgments that didn't align with her vision. Garner, who appreciated precision and harmony, tended to keep his dissatisfaction to himself. However, his quick comments and body language conveyed a different message. There were rumors that Beale and Edward Bianca, the film's director, had a falling out at one time. Insiders suggested that Beale's insistence on doing things her way slowed down productivity and caused conflicts within the team, although the specifics were never disclosed. Despite his best efforts to maintain his objectivity, Garner, who is always professional, was clearly not having fun. Beale's ability to toggle the charm on and off like a switch added complexity. She came across to the media as self-assured and humorous. She could come out as judgmental, domineering, and aloof to the actors and crew. Working with someone like that, according to Garner, is like being in a frigid room with a temperature that never fluctuates. The clash was not a fierce one. It was the silent kind that gradually wears people down. These weren't big outbursts that were captured on film or featured in gossip magazines. A vivid image of what was going on was provided by the minor moments, side remarks, silences, and snubs. They were also the kind of conflicts that, although they don't often make the news, people who experience them never forget. Garner learned a lesson from the event. Occasionally, the most profound impressions are not made by the most boisterous arguments. It's the silent ones. And he was not alone in feeling that cold, as he would soon learn. James Garner was not alone in feeling anxious as he left Lauren Beale. A number of actors and insiders have subtly expressed similar opinions over the years. Stories that passed in private chats, green rooms, and dressing rooms but rarely made headlines. The way Beale dealt with other strong personalities was one of the most revealing trends. She made it quite evident that no one intimidated her. Her confidence was viewed as confrontational, even belligerent, by some, while others respected it. McCall had a reputation for pushing limits with directors and arguing with co-stars who didn't share her fervor on stage, especially during her Broadway days. Theater insiders claimed that Beale's insistence on managing the performance her way caused tension during rehearsals for some productions, not due to inexperience or artistic disagreements. The heat was felt even by seasoned artists. According to reports, one performer who had co-starred with her in a revival left the show in the middle, claiming irreconcilable creative differences, a term that frequently conceals much deeper personal strife. There were rumors that cooperation had become a battleground due to Beale's thirst for dominance. Even though the incident was never made public, it contributed to the unspoken legend that surrounded her private life. Brenda Vaccaro, an actress who worked in similar fields, allegedly implied in an interview that Beale might be hard to get along with when she wasn't the center of attention. Although she never gave names, it was obvious who she was referring to given the situation and date. Working with Beale could be draining, even for those who quietly appreciated her talent. She was brilliant, recalled one unnamed stage actress. But she had a way of making the air feel thinner when she walked in. Then there was the issue of old pals who became distant co-workers. Eventually, some of Beale's closest connections in the industry dissolved, not because of scandal or treachery, but just because maintaining such intimate ties came at too great an emotional cost. Yes, she might be devoted, but she could also be demanding, domineering, and quite critical. According to a friend from her early years, she was the type of person who would never let you forget any slights, no matter how minor. This cautious edge was evident even in her interviews. The call frequently discussed honesty, but it was selective. She was eager to criticize people, particularly other actors. I once told a reporter that I had to fight harder than most of them. It was an insightful remark about her perspective and how she evaluated other people. Respect, after all, seemed to have to be gained the hard way and was not always bestowed freely. A broader picture emerges when you examine these testimonies collectively, taking into account the tense situations on stage, the strained friendships, and the silent remarks made by actors who have experienced it. Garner's voice was not alone. He joined a silent chorus of those who had been through the same cold front. The pattern was indisputable, even though none of them yelled it from the rooftops. And before long, even Beale's admirers would be unable to ignore that trend as it caught up with her notoriety. Something unexpected started to happen as the years went by and Lauren Beale's profession gained less attention. She began to lose the carefully manicured image she had spent decades honing. Because of the calm honesty of time, not because of a scandal or a media frenzy. More interviews surfaced, more industry veterans recollected their experiences, and more memoirs were published. It was harder to disregard the truths about Beale that had previously been whispered. More than anyone had expected, James Garner's subliminal warning that she was not as simple to work with as her polished reputation implied started to ring true. Other collaborators started talking more openly in the years following The Fan. Once silent directors talked about the difficulties of working with Beale, pointing out her rigidity and propensity to control a show. According to one director, she was intelligent but unyielding, and she didn't know how to compromise. Even enthusiasts commenced to notice a unique tone in her later interviews. As Beale grew older, her remarks about Hollywood turned increasingly more sour. She criticized modern-day stars, disregarded new skills, and stated herself as one of the final actual actresses. At the same time as a few trendied her defiance, others noticed something else. A refusal to conform and a disdain for everybody who had now not lived through her era. It was not simply in print. In award display appearances and late career interviews, Beale often came throughout as cold or dismissive, brushing off questions or correcting hosts mid-sentence. What turned into as soon as seen as confidence now read as superiority, and it rubbed people the wrong way. Quietly, her mystique gave way to a more complicated reality. After which there had been the retrospectives. As film historians started to re-evaluate the golden age of Hollywood, a more nuanced view of Beale emerged. She became nonetheless celebrated, of path. Her talent, her presence, and her impact had been undeniable, but the image of the untouchable queen of cool turned into replaced by means of something more complicated. A girl who had fought enamel and nail for her area in the industry and in doing so may also have lost the warm temperature of those around her. James Garner by no means gloated. He by no means stated, "I instructed you so." That was no longer his style. But for people who had examined between the traces of his memoir and remembered his warning, the portions began to healthy. He had visible at lengthy before others had. The emotional distance, the strength plays, the diffused need to manipulate each room she entered. In a city wherein reputations are everything, Garner's quiet reality stood tall towards Beale's towering fable. And what made it all of the greater powerful was the fact that he had not anything to advantage from announcing it. He become now not chasing revenge or searching for attention. He in reality couldn't foe it had now not befell. And now with hindsight, people ought to sooner or later see the full image. Ultimately, James Garner never made a scene. He never aired his grievances on Communicate Indicates. Never penned a dramatic disclose and never attempted to tarnish absolutely everyone's legacy. That become not who he was. However, he also refused to pretend. What he skilled with Lauren Beale left a mark. Not as it changed into explosive or demanding, but as it quietly exposed the cost of working alongside someone who valued manage greater than connection. Garner's tale isn't just about one uncomfortable film set. It is approximately the larger reality in Hollywood. That photograph regularly shields truth, and legends are not usually what they appear. For decades, Beale's popularity as a formidable, uncompromising icon went unchallenged. She was praised for her hearth, her power, and her defiance. But what changed into often disregarded became how that same fire should burn the people round her. She turned into not a villain. She turned into no longer evil. But she changed into difficult. And once in a while hard leave scars. Garner saw it. He felt it. And instead of launching an assault, he surely selected honesty. A quiet honesty that through the years proved to be more effective than any headline. Maybe that's what makes this story so compelling. No longer the drama, no longer the tension, but the reality that one in all Hollywood's maximum likable stars saw something others selected to ignore. And in preference to shouting it, he whispered not to rip someone down, but to talk the reality due to the fact someone needed to. So the next time you listen about a respected actor creating a quiet remark, elevating a gentle pink flag, or telling a tale that does not pretty and shape the public narrative, ask yourself, what are they virtually attempting to say? Due to the fact James Garner attempted to warn us and no person believed him.